Wonderful. How y'all doing today?
Hi.
Good.
Great.
Woo!
Welcome guys. This is my first Warsptock. It's actually quite an interesting and fun community, I got to say. And I've been kind of involved in the ArcaOS space for a little time now, and I really wanted to share my passion for DOS gaming and how this coalesces with the ArcaOS and OS2 ecosystem. So let's get started. Is ArcaOS a DOS gaming mecca? Oh, I guess we're going to find out. So, a little introduction about me. Who is this young whippersnapper? What is he doing here? So, because I wasn't here for yesterday to introduce myself. So, those who don't know, I'm Matt Nawrocki, born and raised in Pittsburgh. Go Steelers, go Pittsburgh Penguins. That's where I'm from. I bounced around a couple places, and I've been living out here in the Phoenix area since 2020. As far as my earliest computing experience, this goes way back to the early 90s, 1992. My dad, he took a class at a community college to learn how to build a PC, and he puts together a white box 486 DX33, MS-DOS 5, and it's like, this is just going to be for work. Yeah, right. So I end up playing, my fair share of Commander Keen, Duke Nukem, and my dad plays Wolfenstein 3D. And later, of course, when Doom came out, my dad's like, nah, that's not appropriate for a Christian household. So he gets Dark Forces instead. So that's the FPS he used instead. The Doom clones, as they called them. So, But and then one little quick anecdote from my youth. So I was in the first and second grade. I went to a Catholic private school before I was homeschooled, and of course I hated school except for the computer class. I was excited, and the bell rang, and I ran right to there, beelined it. They had their collection of old 286, 386s, just because this is 1995, whatever. This is what they had in surplus. And my dad, he wasn't thinking about this. He had a stack of 5 1/4-inch floppies for like DOS and random software. He's like, Matt, I don't really need this anymore. Why don't you just take it and give it to your teacher, whatever. Well, of course, me being the galaxy brain person I was, I took the MS-DOS disks, stuck it in one of the computers, and started wiping the hard drive. And I actually got sent to the principal's office, and they're like, well, what are you doing? Like, where'd you get these? I don't know. My dad gave them to me, and just kind of shrugged. And yeah, I think I was detained there, and my mom had to come pick me up and was wondering what the heck that was about. And then, I also learned through breaking stuff. So my dad, again, with the old 486, we didn't have a multi-sync monitor. I was playing a Mickey Mouse game, and I switched the video mode from VGA to Tandy, and it screwed everything up. So yeah, he was not happy. He came home and was like, okay, whatever. So that's a little bit about my background there as far as the gaming side goes. And then as far as OS2, I kind of got into that space kind of by virtue of going to an old classic bookstore, and they had a copy of OS2 Warp 3 Red Spine edition. It was like less than $10. And someone in the audience remarked yesterday, said I spent $9 too much on that copy. So probably right, because I tried to fire it up in a VM and it didn't do much because I didn't know any better. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. But I stuck with it, and I remember Ecom Station coming down the line, and got into that a little bit. I managed to hook up with Roderick when he was at Mensis at the time, and I wrote a review for Ecom Station 2.2 beta when that was supposed to be the next hotness, and that we know what happened there. It vanished. And then ArcaOS came by, and I just was thinking, man, this is incredible that this platform still has staying power. But anyway, for the remainder of the presentation, if we can refrain from any questions till the end, just so that way I can keep a train of thought, that would be perfect. So, all right. So the premise for this talk: is ArcaOS a suitable platform for retro PC gaming? So we're going to explore DOS game compatibility under the following situations. We're going to be using the native OS2 DOS session, and we're also going to be using DOSBox 2, which is expected around 0.74-3. There's a port done. I don't remember the individual who did the port. It's a labor of love, and really appreciate that the community has this out there. You can acquire it from their website, or I believe there's a copy on Hobbs as well if you're interested. And we're going to compare the expected ease of use, the performance metrics, and the general viability of these options for the user if you're wondering about how this would work out for you. So first, let's talk about the OS2 DOS session. So this mode is a proper, pretty much bare metal DOS experience. I mean, they weren't kidding when they said it's a better DOS than DOS, and that carries over into ArcaOS. And for the uninitiated, for ththose in the audience, especially over the internet today, this is a distinct and separate mode from the OS2 command prompt. So if you go down into your toolbar and you click on the different command prompts, technically the OS2 command prompt is its own environment. And if you were to run a DOS executable there, it actually fires up an additional DOS session because it just goes based on the stub of the exe to determine what kind of program it is. And then DOS session properties can be set at the DOS application level by using the right-click menu, go into Properties, Session, and then DOS Properties. We're not going to obviously go into all the different tweaks, but there's quite a number of them. Few notable ones that might be worth considering if you're trying to play DOS games. We have a VEFI full-screen refresh, which it has a value, it defaults to, I believe, 35, and some games get kind of jittery with that, so cranking that down sometimes can help with performance. And then there's video window refresh and session priority in case, say, the CPU isn't giving enough juice to the app. You could change the session priority, and that could potentially help with performance. Some experimenting is required. And this is how a OS2 DOS session properties window would look like with all the different settings available. So, for our next environment, DOSBox 2. So for this particular piece, the DOS emulator, it's basically a DOS emulator of sorts that allows for customization of the environment to better suit picky DOS games that don't know what to expect. DOSBox also utilizes the SDL for rendering output to the screen. So it's just it's a media layer that prints the pixels and whatnot directly to it, and it keeps it like a unified platform, which helps for software development. And then the emulated core, how DOSBox works is it has like a profile that you can configure, and it's a core that emulates basically that sort of vintage of hardware you're trying to aim for. And it's offered in two different modes. They have a normal and a dynamic mode. Choosing the correct core as well as the cycle count is vital for success for making sure the game runs properly. There is an auto mode that it defaults to, but in my experience, automatic detection can be kind of wonky, so you may want to set those preferences in your DOSBox.conf file to ensure that it works correctly. Unlike Windows, Linux, or Mac OS, ArcaOS doesn't offer an OpenGL backend or a render mode that can help with any of the heavy lifting. Only surface rendering is available, but in my experience, through my tests, it didn't really matter all that much. I felt like the surface rendering worked just fine, and it pumped out the game, actually, in many cases, faster sometimes. So, for the test system that I used for going through all this, I used a Z97 platform running the following specifications. I used an Intel Core i7, the one and only legendary 5775C, which is a Broadwell chip that was in a short production run with Intel. But I turned off the hyper-threading because OS2 seems to prefer that. Also was running with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080 with a 1 terabyte SATA SSD formatted as JFS with the default block size, and 32 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM, I believe at like 1600 speed, but not that it's really too relevant for this. And I also, for occasional tests here and there, I also have a ThinkPad X131E, which I have indeed brought to the convention. If anyone would like to test run some of the games that I tested here today, I brought it on the laptop if you want to poke around afterwards, because I think sometimes it's best to sort of play with it yourself to kind of understand where things are going. So a couple other important notes. All the tests were conducted under UEFI, so unfortunately for all the hardware I had, either the CSM was not working quite the way it needed to, and I had my frame buffer would get all corrupted, or however you'd like to say it, or it just straight up didn't work, or the CSM just doesn't exist. So, but that's okay for the purposes of this talk, and here's why. I feel that not all CSM VGA implementations are created equal, and I want to emphasize the rapid progress made with the UEFI mode. The fact that ArcaOS went from 5.0 not even having any idea about this to being able to run VGA applications right out of the box in ArcaOS 5.1, I think is incredible from that standpoint, and it needs to be highlighted. Now, of course, the UEFI mode's VGA implementation may not be perfect, but it's headed in the right direction, and I know ArcaNoa loves to make their code fully baked, and that's a very important thing to highlight as we go through this. So, what drives all this? What gets the graphics printed to the screen, and how did we get to this point in the first place? Well, there's a virtual device driver called VEFI.sys, and it's considered a modern replacement for VSVGA.sys. And basically, it's the UEFI video compatibility interface that provides the VGA, EGA, and CGA modes for DOS and Win16 sessions. So those games and applications that utilize and need that sort of interface doesn't have to worry about thinking about, oh, what's OS2 doing or any of that. It can stay completely unaware and oblivious to that, and this handles everything there. And this does include the standard IBM VGA compliant modes like 320 by 200 256 color or 640 by 480 16 color. And also supports Mode X, so think 320 by 240 and 256 color, and the fancier VBSVGA VESA modes like 640 by 480 and higher. It can drive those as well. So as for the driver, there are some benefits and drawbacks. VEFI.sys, basically it enables any modern PC to run Win16 and DOS sessions without having to worry about the proper BIOS level compatibility with VGA. So you can plug and play, basically. If your system can run, and if it's a UEFI system and it can run ArcaOS, chances are this will work just as well. And the performance for what it is quite quick and reliable. So long as your CPU can keep up, you should have no problem running this. And unlike the CSM VGA compatibility code, which varies in quality from vendor to vendor, ArcaNoa is able to control the quality of the experience with this driver alone. So I consider it kind of like a singular point of reference there, which I think is a great thing going forward as this marches forward with all the changes and updates. However, VEFI isn't without its drawbacks. The driver is very basic and doesn't provide any real meaningful customization. Like, for instance, if you're into things like MTRR, memory type range registers, typically that stuff's abstracted away from you. OS2 handles all that for you behind the scenes, and you can't really change or tweak any of that, it's nice to not have to worry about that, but like in a typical DOS session, if you'd be able to go in and you could run some helper utilities to make adjustments there if it could affect the performance somewhat. You don't have that as much or as easily available. Also, the available screen resolutions that you get really are dependent on what the UEFI BIOS that is provided by your system exposes. So I'll give an example. I was test running this on an Intel Next Unit of Computing box. It's a 10th generation Intel processor, 6 cores, very standard stuff. It fired up, and I got a 4K display hooked up to it, and it presented the 4K pixels, no problem. But when I went into the screen's control panel, I got basically 640 by 480 and 800 by 600 were I think the only other options available, even though the screen was capable of doing 1080p or 720p. UEFI BIOS didn't determine that was a possibility. So that's not ArcaOS's fault. That's just the way it is. It's just the hardware couldn't provide that. But conversely, on my Z97 build, I was able to get all the standard resolutions, widescreen, you name it, it showed up, and I was able to switch into them if desired. So for the first test, we're going to talk about general benchmarking, because I feel if I were to just stand up here and tell you, this game works great, this game does not, it's very subjective. And I like to ground my presentation in reality and objective truth. So I use this tool or this collection of software. It's called Phil's Computer Lab's DOS Benchmark Pack. Phil's Computer Lab is a YouTube channel. He specializes in retro gaming, retro hardware, DOSBox, you name it. And he did this fantastic job of collecting some of these popular games and benchmarks and putting it into one big batch file script. And it has all the commands passed to the different executables to run the different time demos and the different benchmarks, and then output anything to a log. So you could present this to the forums or submit your results if you wish. And for this pack, it also supplies Doom and Quake in a benchmarking mode, which we're going to get here into in a minute. And the results of these benchmarks are supplied in the next few slides. Of course, for best results, just to make sure I give everything a fair shake, for the OS2-DOS session mode, all the benchmarks were run in full screen only. I mean, it was actually quite impressive, the games I could run in a windowed mode, and it would work surprisingly well, unlike, say, Windows 95 or something. You put anything in a window, it says frozen. It's like, well, what is this? This is not fun. So the results from the benchmarks in native OS2-DOS session were a bit mixed at best, with some wild variations in the end results. Not unplayable, I must admit. Everything I threw at it was perfectly playable, but there was just some, little rough edges here and there. The frame buffer in some tests that I experienced, there was some minor corruption in portions of the display in PC Player Benchmark, which is a benchmark made by a company from many years ago, and it just pushes the VGA capabilities of the card to see how fast it runs. And some of the types of modes and the way it interfaces with the hardware, it can be a little bit glitchy, depending. The Doom benchmark, it ran properly, but it was much slower than expected at 4,092 real ticks, which was id Software's way of calculating the performance. The larger the real ticks, the smaller the FPS. It's a little weird that way, the way they design that, but that's all that you would need to know there. And you would divide, there's a value, you divide that by the 4,092 real ticks, and it would give you a value of 18 frames per second. That's how much you were expected to get there. In Quake, it looked and performed quite well in VGA Mode X and VESA modes, but the colors were all wrong and set to 640 by 480 or higher. And again, I'll show a little clip of what that looks like. It was a little interesting, but definitely worth noting. And I might stress this, I can't stress this enough, sometimes FPS counters can be a little misleading. So I would say if you see some ridiculous result, it could just be the way it was calculating based on how the program was running. So take certain ridiculously large valuations with a grain of salt. So here's a chart of what I ran for the DOS benchmark results in an OS2-DOS session. So in the red is PC Player Benchmark running at 640 by 480. I got around 74 frames per second, very, very good result. Doom, and you would think a game from 1993 should not run this slow, but yes, it's 18.2 frames per second. And then when you get to Quake, it shoots way up, and it's just like, that's curious. I wonder what's going on there. And then you go to 360 by 240, and it tanks again. That's strange. And then once you get to 640 by 480, which is a VBE VESA mode, it shoots back up, and it goes to 407 frames per second, or so it claims in the benchmark results. So that Doom result, though, is really curious. I'm wondering about that. That's so interesting. Why do you think that happens? So Doom is an interesting case study, I think. And actually, this was kind of prompted by a fellow ArcaOS tester, and I need to give credit to him bringing this up in the mailing list. His name's Dixie. I believe he's a Russian OS2 developer. And he thinks the explanation for this performance lag is that Doom utilizes planar graphics mode, which uses bit planes, instead of a linear chunky mode, which just writes to the memory and then just flushes and writes to the memory again. So in theory, to kind of try to break this down a bit, the planar mode offers smoother graphics with an upwards of 256 kilobytes of VGA memory space that's addressable. And I think this is kind of the big deal here, because in the IBM VGA specification, if you're just using interrupt 13H, you only get 64 kilobytes of video bank memory there. And back in the old days, when you were running your VGA cards over the ISA bus and things were running really slow, well, you may not have data going quickly enough to the card, and you could have flickers, you could have tearing, and all manner of issues like that. So one workaround to fixing this was, okay, let's use a mode called mode X, which is undocumented technically. This isn't an IBM official mode. And it allows up to 256K of accessible VGA memory in 4 64 kilobyte chunks. And each of those 64K chunks are different pages that then a pointer in the program will point to the different page, and that's why they call it page flipping. So it's a technique. And for the time, and John Carmack is quoted as saying that this mode that he was able to write Doom in did provide a 10 to 15% performance boost over using a linear VGA mode. However, in the modern context, in the modern day, when you're dealing with video graphics memory, and I'm not an expert on this, but you have CPUs that are in the gigahertz now, you've got PCI Express bus, you got gobs and gobs of bandwidth. So this kind of consideration isn't really that big of a deal. So you can throw things into linear frame buffer, and that's why Quake, which is a linear frame buffer, typically, anything in 320 by 200, it'll just treat it like that. And if you have enough CPU and can crank it out on your VGA adapter, it looks great. And in fact, in OS2, DOS mode works really fast. But Doom doesn't because of the page flipping. It's a little bit of a performance issue. So I'm just going to sort of point this out. So this is courtesy of OS Dev Wiki, provides sort of like a diagram of what I'm referring to here. So you have the video memory in planar mode right here, and there's the 4 planes of 64K. And then for each of those pages, it'll just be a pointer that flips to each page. And that sort of in a way, if you think about it, it's like buying the computer time to then pull new data from the bus and then fill those pages. And then that's why Doom, if you play it on any period correct machine of the time, or even modern computers, you notice there's no screen tearing. It's a very smooth, silky smooth experience, which for something like Doom is very important, because if it was flickering constantly or juddering a lot, that's very nausea-inducing. So, not to mention, we're playing a video game. I want to enjoy this. I don't want to be stuck looking at frames like a slideshow. So this is a little bit of a graphic that sort of details how that would look if you were using the Mode X screen resolution. So, getting to DOSBox 2, which is the other contender in this space, the results told a different story. And we can run the benchmarks in 2 CPU modes. So I do want to make sure, for purposes of accuracy, that I benchmark both of these modes. So the first here is I tested in normal CPU mode, which emulates basically the entire processor. That's kind of the goal here. There's no pass-through or no extra trickery going on. So the results here, PC player benchmark, it looked great. And there were no glitches to the video. It was actually pretty darn smooth. But it did come at the cost of FPS. So if you're looking for like hundreds of frames per second, this isn't the mode to go into. Doom, that benchmark ran quite well, with a result of 1318 real ticks, which, if you do the math, is it goes into the equivalent of a respectable 57 frames per second. And do keep in mind, and I should probably note this, Doom was designed to run at a 35 frame per second cap. So this time demo removes that cap, so it just says, okay, let's see how many frames we can pump into this system and see how it goes. So this isn't necessarily something you're going to experience when you're playing this. In this situation, you will see up to 35 frames per second, no problem. And then Quake, this is the one that struggled the most, and to be fair, it makes perfect sense because it's emulating so much here. And it in both VGA and the VESA SVGA resolutions, you got as low as 7.5 frames per second. Maybe if you were lucky, you can get up to 18.5. You really dialed the settings down, but it wasn't very playable and certainly not fun for a DOS gamer. So again, I compiled these results into a chart. So here's PC Player here. It's got 20 frames per second, followed by Doom at 57 frames per second, and then the different modes for Quake. Quake at 320 by 200, standard VGA was 18.5. Quake at 360 by 240 was 8.9, big drop there. And then Quake at 640 by 480 struggled the most there at 7.5 frames per second. So if you were looking at this thinking this was the only mode in DOSBox, this would be kind of disappointing, and you'd be thinking, well, why even bother? But that's the thing about DOSBox is it's very customizable, and it has this thing called the conf file, which you could go into and set the different parameters as you would like to tailor your experience to the best of its ability. And so we're going to also dive into that here. So the dynamic mode, or the dynamic core is what it's called, is this other mode that basically allows it so that you're not having to emulate every single instruction, and it does a lot more pass-through to the CPU, so it's a lot more direct. And in here, the results were definitely different, for sure. PC Player Benchmark, it ran quite smoothly, but the frame buffer appeared to glitch out constantly, showing flicker everywhere. It was a real mess. And in fact, there was a animated, it looks like a battle tank moving around on the ground, and it was like pointing all over the place and didn't know what it was doing. And I think it was just something with the way the dynamic core was operating. It didn't know what to expect, and it was causing that to glitch out. So very strange and very bizarre sort of issue there. Now, if we go to Doom, this benchmark ran exceptionally well with a result of 399 real ticks, which is the equivalent of a whopping 187 frames per second, which is basically lightning speed. It just blazed right through there. And then finally, Quake performed much better across the board, with an FPS between 71 and 171, depending on the screen resolution. So we'll pop into those results. And yes, everything, basically it's like the gas pedal just got hit to the floor. So basically every game here was perfectly playable. Even if you weren't in the time demo mode, you can expect you would have a fantastic time playing these games under DOSBox. And you're also probably wondering why I focus mostly on just Doom and Quake. I think the reason really for this is in a DOS gaming setting, in a DOS gaming context, id Software back in the day really pushed the envelope in terms of what computers were capable of doing back then. And I really wanted to sort of emphasize, here is like a potential worst case scenario by using the software. And I really wanted to, I don't know if abuse the system is the best word, but I really wanted to push it as far as I could. And Doom and Quake, I think, were a really good example of that. So we're going to get to our first example today of a difference between the normal core and the dynamic core. And this is a PC Player Benchmark running. So if we pull this up here, on the left, it's a little slow, but it's perfectly fine. Then on the right, you'll see that, see how that, it's like glitching out and going, oh, yeah, and it's all flickery. And I recorded this using my camera because I'm not sure, like with video capture devices, if things might get lost in translation. So I tried to give as much of a from the human eye perspective as possible with that, with this video. Make sure I didn't skip that. Okay, good. So for the second test, general gameplay observations. Because benchmarks, to be honest, they only tell part of the tale. It shows you measurable performance, but how about the subjective side? And this is where it can be up to the individual. How do the games actually feel when playing them? And truly, it depends on the type of game being run. And as the usual disclaimer goes, your mileage may vary. So what I may like, you may find not so good, and vice versa. But I try to be as clear as I can. Under the OS2 DOS session, my experience was sometimes actually pretty darn good, and sometimes not so good. And to be clear, when I say not so good, I don't mean unplayable. It's playable, but just little issues that were encountered that kind of took away from the experience. 2D side-scroller games like Commander Keen, another id Software title, we just keep coming back to this. It really pushed the limits of things like smooth scrolling on VGA using undocumented registers and such. That makes this a great test for this presentation, but it did not really fare particularly well. I noticed a large amount of judder and screen tearing, and this was after I went into the DOS properties, changed the UEFI screen refresh variable from 35 down to 15, 10. I played and tweaked with settings, and I still couldn't quite eliminate that. Certainly not unplayable, but it could be distracting. 3D DOS titles, on the other hand, were quite good, on the other hand. One title, Alone in the Dark, was silky smooth. And I think what also helps is Alone in the Dark used fixed camera angles. So it's very much like Resident Evil. If you guys, I'm sure you're familiar with that franchise. In fact, Alone in the Dark inspired the person who created Resident Evil. So it's kind of a neat way of looking into it. Yeah, and it looks great. The graphics all were razor sharp, and I didn't notice any dropped frames or any kind of weird graphical glitches. And Quake, again, going back to that, quite playable, excellent frame rates, but the VBE modes could be hit or miss. So Quake, when I would go into anything 640 by 480 or higher, would exhibit this weird purplish tint, and it wasn't just limited to the Z97. I tested this on the ThinkPad and on the Intel NUC, and I got the same exact thing, where it was like this purple filter. I could not quite understand what that might have been based on the settings that I had set. But as a DOS gamer, I think the biggest downfall with the OS2 DOS session currently is the lack of sound. And now this is on the ArcaOS roadmap for ArcaOS to have a Sound Blaster compatibility driver in the future, so that I am looking forward to that, and I will be testing that as soon as that drops. But as of right now, it's radio silence, and I don't have a system that I'm aware in my collection that has PC speaker built into the motherboard. So even though I tested the buzzer setting, I couldn't get that to output because that wasn't there. And Dave mentioned, I was talking on the mailing list about if there was a possibility of getting the PC speaker to output through my actual speakers using UniAud or whatnot, and the answer was no. That's its own thing. So basically completely silent. If you like your games silent, or if you're deaf, then you won't know. So it won't be a big deal. So something to consider there, of course, not a handicap. Under DOSBox 2, the games could count on being run far more consistently, and that is kind of the key word here, consistent. No matter if it was a 2D or a 3D title, the video performance was snappy and responsive, despite having Surface as the only video output option. There was nothing there. I didn't feel like I was missing out on the lack of hardware acceleration. I was actually really impressed with how DOSBox just seemed to just chug along no problem, even on that ThinkPad that I have back there, which is over 10 years old, and it still ran a lot of games quite well. Also important to note, I could obviously use the Sound Blaster and AdLib game audio, and if you wanted to use, say, Gravis Ultrasound, you'd have to configure ultramid directory and then point to it, and that could work as well if you're into that sort of thing. But yes, the big caveat of this entire thing is a preparation would be required to get the environment right. It can be for some games just fire it up and just run your exe, but in some cases it was either too slow or there was something wrong with the way the graphics presented itself. So you would need to just be patient and maybe do some tweaks here and there. And additionally, and I noticed this both on the Z97 build and on my ThinkPad, if you run DOSBox in full screen and you change video modes, let's just say it goes from 80 column text mode to 320 by 240. If you don't do anything else, you'll notice that the bottom of the screen seems to cut off, and that might scare you a little bit and go, what's going on here? Well, DOSBox in OS2 or in ArcaOS in this case, it's not intelligent enough to automatically just change itself. So you have to toggle full screen off and then back on, and then it resets and resyncs back to the center of the display and looks perfectly fine. So if you see that, that's what you can do, and it's a quick and dirty trick. So let's take a look at some of this. So Commander Keen was the one interesting culprit of some of the weird issues with the juddering. On the left-hand side, we got the OS2 DOS session, and on the right-hand side is DOSBox 2, so I'm going to go ahead and play a video. So it's not perfect, the camera might not be picking up, but you can tell how it just feels very shaky on the left, and on the right, perfectly smooth, just like no issues whatsoever. And this is something that you would get even not just out of the box, even though I was playing around with the DOS properties, it would not quite completely go away. So that is something to consider there if you're running any smooth side-scrolling titles.
Okay.
Let's look at Quake. So Quake, under an OS2 DOS session, we have the 360 by 240 on the left, and on the right we're going to have the 640 by 480 VESA mode. So I'm going to go ahead and play this, and there's that tint I'm talking about. As soon as it kicks into that 640 by 40 or higher mode. Doesn't matter if it calls into VB or VESA, interfaces. It does this weird pink, purple tint. I'm not really sure what's happening there. It does report the card correctly. If you go to the when it first starts the game, there's that text that shows up on your screen. It shows the video card reports itself correctly as ArcaOS LLC, which is the vendor ID for the graphics. So it is seeing that correctly, and it's seeing all the modes it can support. It's just beyond a standard VGA mode, you get that weird purple tint. Frame rates are great though. I could certainly play it. It would just look more moody. I guess for Quake, it kind of looks cool though, actually. Now I think about it. I think Trent Reznor might appreciate that.
But you cannot enjoy the blood here.
Yeah. This is the family-friendly mode. It takes the blood and turns it purple. It's all alien, right? Yeah, so maybe this is actually a feature of ArcaOS, actually. We'll just roll with that. So for the conclusions here, ultimately, is ArcaOS a solid refuge for classic DOS gamers? Really, at this time, it depends on what you're looking for. With native DOS compatibility having long been left behind by Windows 64-bit, Windows is not viable for emulators. And in fact, a lot of OSs like that have been leaving DOS way behind in the past, which is a shame. I just feel like there's such good software there that the fact that you're having to be stuck with emulators and at the mercy of the community in that regard is a real disappointment. And then you might be thinking, what about MS-DOS? What about FreeDOS? I mean, especially FreeDOS because it's open source, it's free to download, but you can't run that bare metal on a UEFI system. In fact, the developers of FreeDOS came out and just straight up said, hey, we're not doing this on UEFI, so don't ask. It's not happening. You want to run this project on anything going forward, VMs are probably going to be your best bet. They're positioning it more as like here's a DOS environment you can bundle in certain situations or whatnot, but they're keeping it strictly compatible with past interfaces with the assumption that a BIOS does exist. So that's not going to be the way to go. So truly, if you are looking for a sort of classic, sort of more to the metal as much as possible experience running DOS software and DOS games, ArcaOS really is, I think, the best platform going forward to consider, and especially with all the changes and with the new features that are planned on the roadmap, such as Sound Blaster compatibility. I can see ArcaOS really becoming the unicorn platform for DOS gamers. So with some time and with some TLC. Certainly, I wouldn't want to just be stuck using DOSBox if I can. I think having another platform like ArcaOS, it's good for not just for the community at large, but I think it's good for how software needs to be. You don't want just one single platform. I think it's good to have multiple choices. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you very much for attending my presentation. So, I had a lot of fun making this, and again, if you want to play with the benchmark pack, I have it installed on the ThinkPad. Feel free to come back to the desk. I'm here for the rest of the day at Warsptock, so we'd appreciate your comments and criticisms or anything of that nature, and have a great day, everyone.
Great.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. First of all, can you run PC-DOS in a virtual machine? Is that?
Oh.
Do you know?
You sure can. I mean, if there's.
How does this stuff work when you do that in an environment like that?
So let me make sure I understand your question. Are you referring to like PC-DOS in like VirtualBox or?
Yeah, in VirtualBox, running PC-DOS.
Yeah.
In a VM.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do these games behave?
So I didn't extensively test that, to be honest, because most DOS gamers typically just want to just plug and play and just go.
Right.
I mean, VM is certainly using like VirtualBox, certainly a valid choice, and you could actually, from what I understand from the FreeDOS community, they have demos of this on YouTube, and they have played games like Commander Key and whatnot in a virtual machine. That could work. Mm-hmm. But I think from the context of ArcaOS, if you're running it on this operating system, I'm looking at what's viable on that platform, I think. I think based on what I've been able to observe and what I've been able to play with, the OS2 DOS session and DOSBox are probably your better bets, especially if performance is your paramount concern, because do keep in mind too, with a virtual machine, you have that extra overhead of having to run the virtualizer, and sometimes the other thing too I think people don't consider is with something like VirtualBox, you can't change the cycles, you can't do fine-tune tweaks to sort of emulate a certain level of processor. There is a project though that I've had some tangential sort of involvement with called DOSBox, which is pretty cool, and it allows you to virtually build a computer from the 80s or 90s from the ground up with the different processor, the different graphics card, sound card, you name it. It emulates that entire experience at the expense of performance. But if you have a fast enough desktop computer, you could conceivably use DOSBox to emulate something very close to what you would have been able to get on a computer from that era. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thanks.
Well, mine's kind of a follow-on on that.
Mm.
Other than ArcaOS, is there any other operating system without a VM that will run UEFI that will run DOS stuff?
No, there's none.
No.
Nothing.
No.
No, this is the promised land.
Well, maybe there is
I didn't understand his question. Say it again.
Is there any other operating system that will run on UEFI that will run DOS programs?
maybe that there is a hacked version of a UEFI loader for Windows 7, a 64-bit UEFI loader. Just a hacker put it together, and it might be able to get Windows 7 to boot on a UEFI system. If it works with 32 bits, I don't know, but that's your only shot. Other than that, there's nothing in the market that has current DOS support out of the box, I think.
Right. And there is a project for the Linux operating system called DOS-EMU, which is a little bit more to the metal compared to DOSBox. That might be worth considering if you're looking for that, but again, some assembly required. It's not going to be like you just go into a terminal and just type a DOS-EXE and it'll just fire up, like in the case of OS2, where you have that built in from
Have they not
the start.
actually put some stuff for that also directly in the Linux kernel to simulate some of the low-level 16-bit calls? I think they did some of that stuff for Wine as well. But they did some pretty low-level engineering for that, I seem to recall.
Oh no, and it's definitely possible. I mean, like you said with Wine. I mean, but you have to know that you want to run that software, download the packages, or if it's anything kernel related, make sure those switches are on.
You could also do a community favor. You, for example, reported this Quake 2 game, that 640-480, that gets this little skin rash color on the picture. Could you report that on the testers list, or maybe open a ticket for it? Because that's something that might be fixable, I don't know. But it's worthwhile looking into. If you fix
definitely.
one of these games, there's potentiality that a whole bunch of these other games that use the same, most of these DOS games use the same interfaces to talk to the same type of calls. So if you fix one game, it might just fix a whole bunch of them.
No,
And as far
precisely.
as I can tell, so far nobody has reported anything, so any
That's
feedback
true.
on that.
That's true.
And as you said, if it gets fixed for one system, it will fix it all because it's all software based. So feedback on that regard is a very useful thing.
I'll be sure to file a ticket.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Sure.
Yeah.
In your description of the games, one of the things maybe it's an argument I didn't understand.
Oh, sure.
It talked about judder and screen tearing.
Yeah.
And it was just sort of new for me.
No problem. Thanks for asking. It's a great question. So when I'm talking about screen tearing, what that is if you were to visually look at the game, you'll have, like say, the top part of the screen has a certain part of the picture, and the bottom part of the screen has a different part. It's like it's slightly behind in time. And then you'll see this invisible, it's like a line, it all looks like, but it's not actually drawing a line. It's just the half of the frame that hasn't caught up is below. And that's the kind of screen tearing I'm referring to. And what the Mode X was supposed to resolve with Doom was because you had that page flipping, you already had everything in the video memory right there. So you didn't have to worry about a fresh read from over the ISA bus in that like fraction of a millisecond or whatnot. So it gave you that sort of advantage of having frames up front to use. But yeah, with screen tearing is a problem that's even a problem in modern gaming today. That's why they have a setting called VSync. And VSync, what that does is it ensures that the screen and the refresh rate of that screen matches the frames that are able to be pumped from the graphics card so that at all times your frames look solid every time a frame is delivered. That does mean that when VSync is enabled, sometimes the frame rate will drop to sort of compensate, but that's a good thing. You want that. Or in a more modern context, there are technologies like G-Sync for NVIDIA or FreeSync for every other video card, which basically allows for a dynamic mode, where if the card starts to struggle, even at say 60 hertz, for instance, it's able to downclock the monitor to a way to sort of compensate, so you don't see any like of that screen tearing, and it keeps the experience as smooth as possible, essentially. So if that makes sense. I hope I answered that.
I think that's right.
Great.
And then the judder?
Oh, yeah, so the judder that we experienced in Commander Keen, so that sort of like shaky effect. And again, I think it's better to see it also on the ThinkPad if you wanted to play around with it in the OS2 DOS session, but the judder is like, it's like this, the screen is drawing what's supposed to come after, because it's a smooth scrolling side scroller, but the video buffer isn't able to catch up, so it just has this like, it looks like it's, you're driving a car and you're constantly slamming on the brake, constantly, you know, so it's a little jarring, to say the least, but I hope that also makes sense there.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking in Doom
Yeah.
about mode X mode.
Yeah.
Is
Mhm.
that supported on the DOS sessions?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I didn't
Mode
know.
X, I know I did mention earlier it's an undocumented mode. It was,
Okay.
I think it was discovered by Michael Abrash back when he was working at Microsoft, when he was working on the Windows NT kernel. But that Mode X, it gives you an extra 40 pixels of vertical resolution.
Okay.
And it has that page flipping characteristic, so you can
And you
do
can
that.
turn it on in the sessions.
Well,
some way,
so
or
yeah, so the game itself has to, of course, be written
Yeah.
for that mode to begin with.
okay.
But as far as like the DOS session is concerned, there is the DOS properties. If say you're noticing it struggle a little bit, you could change the VEFI, refresh value and see if that might help. But beyond that, there's no way to like say take Doom and force it to a linear mode. Not at least without a source port.
Okay.
I'm talking about vanilla Doom, the executable that it put out back in 1993. That's kind of where I'm going with.
So how many people play this kind of stuff?
Oh, you'd be shocked.
lot.
So many people. DOS games, it's funny. It's like, I think it's had a renaissance ever since YouTubers have come out, like LGR is a good one, Lazy Game Reviews. You have these people that are kind of calling back to a better time in computing when you didn't have, I'm going to try not to be vulgar here, but there are not very nice people on the internet that, they'll cheat and, do multiplayer games and snipe people real quick. And yeah, they want to go back to a time where, single player games were well crafted, there were good stories, you didn't have these day zero patches that you're like, did they seriously ship an unfinished game like out to store shelves? There's this sort of notion of like a classic experience that people are kind of yearning for. They want to go back to that. And projects like DOSBox and DOSEMU and or ArcaOS in this case with its DOS mode, it's sort of like we're able to get back to that in the year 2023. I think that's a great thing.
It's even better. There are new DOS games being published. If you look what the 8-bit guy is doing, he has this game called Planet X, and it's published for a whole bunch of different Commodores, Amigas. But I have a copy of it at home. I ordered a floppy, and there's actually a copy of Planet X game for DOS. But there are other people who are publishing games for Commodore, DOS. They're even publishing old cassettes for Nintendo 16-bit consoles. So it's all over the map, even for the and the funny thing is, they're even now making games that have better graphics supports than they ever used to do, because they write all sorts of assembly for the small. So there's this whole plethora. I once visited the Dutch OS2 user group meeting and there was a Commodore user group. My jaw dropped. I walked in there. There were 70 people sitting stacked into the small room, all with Commodore, CRTs, etc. People came from Germany and Belgium, drove 2 hours for a Commodore meeting. 70 people sitting there. I was going like, huh? And if I have an OS2 meeting with Dutch OS2 user, we sit there usually with 6 or 7 people, so it's like, whoa. So yes, it's very hot. That user group has over 500 members. So
Wow.
that gives you kind of an impression how hot retro gaming really is.
It is.
And now this 8-bit guy is building a Commodore 64 clone you can buy for €500 with a 6502 CPU, and to make it all look as much as possible as a Commodore 64. You know? That's how big this is.
Yep.
Maybe you should advertise this as like VBox stock or something.
And we thought we were robots.
Yeah. Well, it's an exciting time to be an OS2 user if you're into this sort of subset of DOS applications. The fact that there is this capability, and the fact that we went from, well, again, ArcaOS 5.0 not even being UEFI aware and not being able to run on some of this newer hardware to this current situation, this is a great start. And if there's fresh blood to be brought into the ecosystem, I think it's valuable to stress the UEFI compatibility, because imagine going on eBay and saying, oh, hey, you guys need to buy up this busted up ThinkPad if you want to play on this. That may not sell as well to that demographic. So I think that's why I really wanted to stress in this talk the performance of the UEFI VGA graphics. And there's a lot of good here. I want to stress, even though I had pointed out some issues, there's some really good stuff going on. And I will continue to be involved in the process when, especially once the new audio driver drops and more improvements happen to VEFI. I will be there to help continue to file bugs and work through that. But
Great.
yes, sir.
This is really kind of for Lewis.
Yeah,
Do you see this as a marketing opportunity?
I do. And the gaming industry is a multi-billion-dollar segment of the computing market, and retro gaming is gaining more market share by the day. So when we started talking about the ability to run DOS and WinOS 2 sessions again reliably, thanks to the UEFI compatibility, that was one of the first things that came to my mind, was that we can aim for a gaming release of ArcaOS. And I don't mean a separate edition for running games, like a separate server edition or something like that.
Different box.
I mean that somewhere hopefully along the 5.1 release cycle, whether it's 5.1.3 or 5.1.4, that will be the gaming release of ArcaOS, where we have that virtual sound blaster driver and audio for WinOS 2 that's reliable, and you'll be able to do all of that in the one box. And a lot of these glitches and whatnot that we're seeing now will have smoothed out to the point where it should be pretty much plug and play and start it up and run your game, and then fine tune from there.
Interesting.
Oh, and
Yeah.
one thing is, can you run these equally well in full screen and windowed mode? Or how does that work?
He said these are all full screen ones.
They're all,
Yeah.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, no, I ran
Yeah.
everything in full screen just to give it the best. Wanted to just ensure in case there's some kind of anomaly with running it in a window. But I have to say, I have run a couple games in a window. There is one downside though, at least if you don't go into the preferences and do any scaling at default. If you're running on a 4K screen or something, it's like the size of it's like with like a magnifying glass. Great vision test though, I gotta say that. What can you see? I see blobs.
Most DOS games actually can't run in a DOS window. I think everything that goes higher than 320 to 40, you need to run full screen.
Yeah,
The
I think so.
original VGA from IBM also did not support that.
Right.
The DOS window is primarily intended for DOS programs in text mode, such as Lotus 123 or WordStar or WordPerfect, where you want to run something in a text window. That's where that text window is really intended for.
Anything else?
Thanks
I
very
think
much.
we're good.
All right.
Thanks, Matt.